So you are all very welcome to another programme on a Monday night with us, Social Rights Ireland and the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. And tonight we'd love to extend a very warm welcome to Matt Siegfried. Matt Siegfried is based in the US. He is an academic, a writer, a researcher, a historian who has come tonight to speak to us on the topic which was advertised. It was a very broad sounding topic, but it's on white supremacy then and now. So white supremacy in the United States then and now. So we could talk for decades on that, but we will keep it to roughly about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some commentary and observations or questions from our panelists. And we know that this time of year in particular is important to us here in Ireland because every year on St. Patrick's Day, around St. Patrick's Day time, the Dublin political establishment travels to Washington, and they travel to reaffirm Ireland's so-called special relationship with the United States. But for us anti-imperialists, we know that this isn't friendship between peoples. It is just an extension or an endorsement of the alignment with the centre of global imperial power. And to understand all of that power, we have to understand its foundations. So in the United States, white supremacy developed inside the capitalist imperialist system as a tool to divide the working class and to stabilise the rule of capital. So immigrant groups, including the Irish, were gradually integrated into this whiteness and encouraged really to identify with that system rather than to build solidarity with Black and oppressed workers. But despite that, many Irish took the side of Black people, in particular during the civil rights movement. And this isn't just about, Matt's not here just to talk about history because while that's very important and always to have the historical context as a backstory to understand the present, it's very important. But Ireland today is materially tied into the imperial system. And in particular, we spoke about this just before the recording started, through the use of Shannon Airport by the US military. The Dublin, and it has to be said, the Belfast establishments facilitate the logistics of American wars. And that exposes the myth of Irish neutrality that liberal politics uses really to pacify and has used for a long time to pacify the population. And the consequences are far reaching as imperial tensions are now escalating in West Asia with the growing aggression on Iran. The economic shockwaves are already threatening energy supplies right through to the world food chain itself. So working people around the world, of course, will be the ones who are going to bear the cost of all of this. And tonight we're really looking at white supremacy in the United States then and now, not just as an ideology, but similar to the Nazi or the Zionist movement, intertwined with capitalism, intertwined with empire, and the division of the working class. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Matt Siegfried. Thank you very much for your time. I believe it's afternoon time there. You still have daylight. We're in the dark now, Matt, but you're going to enlighten us. Thanks, Matt.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. Well, thank you so much for having me. I've known Tommy and Patricia for well over 20 years now, I think. So it's wonderful to continue working together after a couple of decades. And this story is going to be very familiar to everybody here, and it's going to be familiar not just uh, um, because of the history of Ireland, but because of what's going on currently in Ireland. And one of the things I think to say is, as we start this discussion, is to think about these recent demonstrations, anti-immigration demonstrations that have happened recently in Ireland. And they are only possible, in my mind, they are white supremacist demonstrations. Ireland has had white supremacist demonstrations against immigrants with the repugnant view of loyalists marching with nationalists. And so what is the common identity between these two groups? It's not Irish. It's not British. It might not even be European. It's not religion. It's whiteness. It's whiteness. And it's anti-immigrantness. And the fact that Ireland is now a partner to an imperial project in the European Union means that Ireland is now part of a white supremacist project, right? And I think and I think that's pretty, it's one thing to say we've been victims of imperialism, and now we're participants in this, now obviously not the people here, but the government, the government. And I think that also tells us about what white supremacy is. It can change. It's malleable. It can incorporate new people into it. And that's one of the things we've seen in the United States is a constant reimagining, a reinterpreting of what white supremacy is, right? And sometimes that included the Irish, and sometimes it didn't include the Irish. Sometimes that included Italians, sometimes it didn't. Very interestingly, today, for the first time, it's beginning to include Jews when it never included Jews before, right? Jews were not considered white in the United States. And now, as part of the imperialist project, maybe Jews are considered white in the United States, at least by a section of the white ruling class. So we're looking at something that changes, and it changes all the time because our societies change all the time. We all know, but I think that we need to underline this because we are in a period of major ideological decline, reversal. But race doesn't exist. And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves that race does not exist as a biological reality. It simply does not. Racism exists as a material reality, but biology, it's ridiculous. And I think everybody here, your identity may be Irish, but that's not a biological identity. And I imagine if you all looked into your backgrounds, you would have family from all over the place, right? Not just Ireland, but your cultural identity, not your biological identity, is Irish. And think about this for an American. I'm an American. My background is I have some family from Oknakloi, Ballygolly area. I have some family from Sweden. I have some family from what is now Ukraine. I have some family from Germany. I have some family from Italy. I can't be any of those things. But in the United States, I can be white, right? I can't identify. I'm not Swedish. I'm not German. I'm not Irish, right? Even though all of that is my background. In the United States, I am white, whether I want to be or not, right? And so this thing that is not real becomes materially real, right? Just the way class is not real. It's a social structure, but boy, is it real in our lives, right? And so race is the same way. And I want to say a little bit about how race and class work together. Because, we talk about intersections, and it's not an intersection because they're not two separate things. We only understand race because of class and class because of race. So when we talk about white, and again, I'm going to be speaking about America, but you all have probably heard the term white trash, right? Or white workers. So when we say white, to mean the working class, we have to add something to it, right? Because white doesn't mean it has a class signifier that doesn't mean working class. So when we say white and we mean workers, we have to add working class whites, right? But if we say black, you never hear anybody say black workers because we assume black people are going to be working class, right? So you don't have to say the black working class or the black, you assume it, right? And think about this in another way, that race and class. So for me to be loyal to my class, the working class, which is not racial, it's right, it's all different kinds of races, I have to be anti-white. I have to be loyal to my class. For a black person to be loyal to their class, they have to be pro-black. Do you see what I'm saying? The, the same way in if you're an English person, to be loyal to your class, you have to be anti-imperialist. But if you're Irish to be loyal to your class, you have to be anti-imperialist as well. Do you see what I'm saying? And the same is true with black and white in terms of how we understand class, right? So I was a founding member back in the 80s of a organization called Anti-Racist Action. And we decided to bring the war against the fascists to the fascists. And we wanted to win white workers away from fascism. And what we said to them was, you can be white or a worker. You can't be both. You can't be both. You must choose if you have to choose class over race. But we would never tell that to black people, right? Absolutely be proud of your race, defend your race, because race and class are not separate, right? They're how they're lived. They're how they're lived. The other thing is, where does this notion come from of white supremacy and race? And as a Marxist, it's almost undeniable where it comes from. And if we just think about it for a moment, it's their aristocratic notions of lineage, right? And that's how you transfer property from one generation to the other, by blood, right? So a duke, they might have kids with all kinds of women, but it's only the legitimate child, right, that gets the like your relationships are defined by who is going to inherit, right? And and back then, when we're only people of a certain class owned any property at all. And there were even laws in England, for example, about poor people in work of a class couldn't wear purple, couldn't wear certain colors. So class was racialized in the view of, my blood means I am an heir to this fortune. My blood means that I deserve this fortune. Your blood means you don't deserve this fortune. My blood says I am from a ruling dynasty. Your blood says you are not from a ruling dynasty. All of that exists before capitalism, right? And so how big of a leap is it for that old ruling class to say our bloodlines, meaning just my parents and stuff like that, to our bloodlines are is whiteness, is race. And what does that mean? And this is, I think, the core of what white supremacy means, what it has come to mean. In capitalism, it has come to mean access to property. That's what it means fundamentally. And so when Donald Trump stands up and goes, that Venezuelan oil is ours, he means it. He means it. And it doesn't matter that it's in Venezuela. Because he's a white man, he knows how better to use that property than the Venezuelans. We can make more money. We can maximize profits out of that Venezuelan oil that they can't. We deserve it, they don't. The same was said about land here, about indigenous people. They are not maximizing the productive use of this land. Therefore, they should not have rights to it because we can maximize the productive use of this land. And the same way that Ireland saw different kinds of plantations, different kinds of settlements, colonizations. Originally the sort of Normans were a kind of a military conquest, right? Not necessarily to take all the land, and you might make a relationship with your Irish speakers around you and live there. And then later it became to dispossess people, and then at the end it was completely a commercial prospect, right? It was, we're going to take this town land and create a mill, and it's going to be a flax mill. And the people who used to be the farmers on that land are now going to be the mill hands of the flax mill, right? And so the colonization became a commercial colonization. The first the first English settlement that lasts in the United States is Jamestown in 1609. And if anybody knows, we think of Jamestown, it was the British who settled. Jamestown was the Jamestown Stockholders Company. It was a shareholders company because colonialism was so expensive and so dangerous that the only way that you might be able to get your money back was to create these joint stock companies, right? And so one of the original uses of a joint stock company is to pull resources for colonial settlement. And the Jamestown Company was going to settle, and I believe it was part of Antrim, that they were going to settle in the early 1600s. And something went wrong with that project. And so it was Virginia that they came to settle. And literally, John Smith and the military leaders of that expedition who are hired by the private company to lead that expedition are people who have been part of the Elizabethan settlements in Ireland. So it is literally the same people. Not just the same ideas, literally the same people, even the same companies in the early 1600s that are settling Ireland and settling the United States, and or what becomes the United States. And it's in this process of getting a notion of race and property together. Because the first thing you have to say is these Indians don't deserve the land they're on. Right? You're automatically you have to justify the stealing of this land. Automatically. As soon as you step foot here. So you have to say that they're not using it to the best use. We can use it to better use, right? We can maximize the profits. And that's what kind of gentrification is, that notion of gentrification. It's like this poor neighborhood could be doing so much better if we just and in some ways, colonization is a big gentrifying project. It's a speculative gentrifying project. And the United States wasn't settled. It was speculated. This is a commercial operation. Each part of this land is a commercial operation. And Patricia took me around Belfast once. I think this is about 15 years ago, Patricia, or 10 years ago. And I think she was expecting me to be shocked at the divisions and I'm from the United States. Belfast felt just like Cincinnati, Ohio to me. With the racial divisions and you move one street over and you're in a black neighborhood and you're in and now you're in a potentially dangerous situation. And when I was growing up, it was literally the bus stops were the neutral zones, right? Where you could go to any neighborhood as long as you stood by the bus stop. Once you stepped off that corner, you were violating a rule and your butt could be taken to town, right? But if you stayed by the bus stop, so that level of segregation of people who literally live and work next to each other all day long and don't see each other at all. That process that so well in Ireland was brought to the United States by those same people. So you talk about that loyalist ideology. Imagine an entire continent settled by the people of the Schenkel and you have the United States. And you wonder why we have these gun crazy, like they still have the settlement ideology. And for a settler to be able to justify your settlement, you need to have two things, and they're completely contradictory, which makes you crazy in the head. You have to say, I deserve all of this. I'm the best person for this. And two, I'm completely oppressed by other people who want to take it from me. Right? So you're both the master race and the biggest victim on the planet, which boy, do we hear that in Israel every day, right? And Donald Trump is nothing but I'm the master race and also everybody the whole world is so unfair against me, right? This is the colonial notion writ large, right? And it really is a psychological thing as well as a class and and it takes on a life of its own, and the end is as the a nation full of people as corrupted emotionally and morally as Donald Trump because of this white supremacy, right? Donald Trump is not an outlier. He is a reflection of a good deal of the United States, right? And that's because the United States was settled by Donald Trump's. That's the speculators, those real estate people. So the other thing to think about, again, about what is this property, right, that we're talking about. So we're talking about property in two things when we're talking about white supremacy. We're talking about property in land and property in people. And one of the things I think that we make a mistake when we're thinking about racism, and you notice I haven't used the word racism here because it's not racism that we're dealing with. We're dealing with white supremacy. It's a very different thing, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. But the we think that slavery was to take advantage of black labor. But where is the wealth in slavery? It is not in potential black labor. It is in actual black bodies, right? That's what's being traded. That's what a market, the market is not in potential black labor. The market is in black human beings. The body itself is what is a commodity, not that labor. And so we've commodified a human being, right? Not again, it's not I'm going to take that's not where the money is. The money is in this actual human being. And how do they have all their teeth? All of this, the most disgusting way you would be able, like you would describe a car. How many miles do they have on them? Are they new? Are they young? How many kids have they had? Right? And all of that. So a black human being was a commodity, right? And so that's automatically dehumanizing. And then think about this in terms of property. Remember what I said about white supremacy. Now, there are two ways to get that commodity, right? That black body, to go to Africa and steal it and to reproduce it here. And to reproduce it here requires procreation. And a black or a white slave master has no problem forcing procreation on his slaves, right? Raping his slaves to create new slaves because we have a one drop rule here. Now, think about this as property. That slave master is impregnating a woman he owns and will then enslave his own child. Think about this. He will then enslave his own child as a piece of his property, as a piece of his property. And so race, even this white man, the father of somebody, looks at their child and does not see their child, but sees a commodity because of the color of their skin. We have a one drop rule, right? And in the United States, that means if you have any African descent in you, you were black. One drop rule, right? So that means if you think about what that means in terms of rape, in terms of how people were identified and thought of, I think you get a sense of the violence, the real violence of white supremacy. This is not just an ideology. This is the justification for rape on a massive scale, the justification for enslaving your own children because you do not see them as human beings, right? And one difference, and this is the difference between Irish and other people and black people in the United States. There was never a law in the United States that identified Irish people as separate. It just never. Now, there was all kinds of prejudices in the United States. We've all seen those signs, no Irish need apply, all of that. But the laws that defined who could vote and who wouldn't were about the color of your skin. So automatically, the Irish, as soon as you step into the United States, you could claim not to be Irish. The problem for the Irish when they came here was language. And I think we don't realize this, that the great majority of the Irish immigration experience came around the famine years. And the majority of those were Irish speakers. So to become white in the United States meant you had to lose the Irish language. That was key. That was key. And there are certain languages you don't have to lose to become white in the United States. For example, German and French. We have long histories of German and French areas of the United States that can continue to speak their languages even today. And in part, I will say Spanish, but that would be Florida and not New Mexico because there are more white Spanish-speaking Caribbeans than there are Mexicans, right? And so in the United States, you would have had a majority of Irish people in the 1860s speaking Irish, probably, right? And that was a barrier to their whiteness. And so dropping the Irish language allowed them more than anything to become white. Even Catholicism wasn't necessarily a barrier because, again, we have never had laws. Even I think that very early in the pre-colonial era, there were laws about religion and stuff like that. But that's the one good thing I can say about the United States is we've never had laws about a religious test. There's nothing that says you must be a member of a certain congregation to have citizenship rights. So even Catholicism wasn't necessarily as much of a barrier as language. But the biggest barrier was the identity with the oppressed, right? And I think that the Irish coming here with an identity with oppressed people would mean automatically that the Irish were a bit of a fifth columnist in the American empire, right? And so great pains were made to bring the Irish on board. And we all know what they did. They brought them on board in local municipalities to become police officers, right? And that was extremely conscious. They knew exactly what they were doing. There are two ways we have police departments in the United States, and both of them are around white supremacy. In the South, we have three ways. In the South, we have sheriff's departments around catching runaway slaves. In the Southwest, we have the Texas Rangers around driving out the Indians. But where I live, like in Detroit, Boston, all of those municipal street or police departments began in the 1870s to police the growing labor movement and the growing strikes, particularly 1877. So this is that first generation of Irish people, right? And they are saying you can either strike or be a cop. Basically, that's the choice they're giving to Irish. And in America, if you strike, you get shot. And if you're a cop, you get to do the shooting, right? And so, there's a bit of a push pull, and you don't want to blame people if you come from a situation of genocide in Ireland and you come to the United States and you drop the language and you put your hat on and you can join the white people, right? And so the Irish went from outside of white to being quintessentially white, right? So they went from being not considered fully white within about 30 years to being quintessentially white because they were told you're really white, unlike those black people you live next to, right? And they knew that they had to create that division. And so today, I would say, unfortunately, and Bernadette McCalliskey, when she was here, she noticed it too. Most black people, most Asian people, most people of color in the United States would say the most vicious white people are Irish people. The most mean. Don't go to an Irish neighborhood if you want to keep your life, kind of thing, right? And so, how did that happen? White supremacy. White supremacy allowed that to happen. Then I want to just go, and I'm just raising up some issues, but I want to end when thinking about property again, about how this is property, how close it is to property. In the United States, I don't know what it's like in Ireland when you had the severe housing. I know you have a severe housing crisis now, but when you had the severe housing crisis in the North around distribution of homes, I don't know if one of the arguments was if we have Catholics come into this neighborhood, housing prices will fall, right? And so if we want to keep housing prices up in this neighborhood, we can't have Catholics moving in. But that is the everybody knows that in the United States. If one black person moves into the neighborhood, then every house in that neighborhood would lose a little value, right? Because then the neighborhood will begin to be seen as a black neighborhood, and the more black people there are there, the less houses those are valued, right? Which means, so think about what that means for property. It literally means that houses are not going to be built for black people. It literally means that a black neighborhood is not going to be able to expand because it's not, remember what we were saying? I can make more money out of this than you. That's the whole reason for doing this, right? So it literally means ghettoization because if you allow a black neighborhood to expand, you're allowing the property to go down around it, right? So you want to keep the black people constrained in a ghetto, not allow them to move into your neighborhood to keep your housing prices up. This is how capitalism and race work together, and it's almost impossible to unlink them. And the last thing I want to say is I want to give two quotes. The first is, of course, from Karl Marx, which is workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. And sometimes I think we think Marx said that because it was an accomplished fact. Marx said that because it was the task at hand. Marx said that because without that, we would lose. Marx said workers of the world unite as what we must do, right? Not as what it is the cornerstone that class identity that we have, right, trumps the racial identity that they want us to have, that they want to for especially for white folks. And so when we're saying workers of the world unite, that's not on the basis of black people joining with white people. That's on the basis of white people denying their whiteness. That's how we're going to be able to unite. And by whiteness, I don't mean our ethnic backgrounds and our language. I mean this notion that I deserve property and you don't. And the same is true in Ireland. When people are protesting about immigrants, what they're really saying is, I deserve the house that they're in because I'm white. I'm Irish. My blood tells me that it should be mine. That's a white supremacist argument. My class tells me that those are my brothers and sisters, and I should unite with them, right? And so I think that when we're thinking about why are people protesting, it's not because they had something that was taken away from them, because those people never had housing to have taken away from. It's because they're entitled to it. They're entitled to it whether they've had it or not, but they're only entitled to it if it's going to be if there's a black person who also has an entitlement to it. And so what you see is in the United States, that means if black people are going to be helped by a program, white people will say no to it, even if it will help them. Right? So they will shoot themselves in the foot because of that. And then the last quote I want to quote is from Gerard Wood Stanley, actually an Englishman. And he wrote this in 1649, 200 years before Marx wrote it. But it is about what I think is the white supremacist notion that the kernel of which was in the old aristocracy. And he's talking about the landlords of England during the English Revolution. And he says, the power of enclosing land and owning property was brought into the creation by your ancestors by the sword, which first did murder their fellow creatures, men, and after plunder or steal away their land, and left this land successively to you, their children. And therefore, though you did not kill or thieve, yet you hold that cursed thing in your hand by the power of the sword. And so you justify the wicked deeds of your fathers, and that sin of your fathers shall be visited upon the head of you and your children to the third and fourth generation, and longer too, till your bloody and thieving power be rooted from the land. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Matt. A very interesting introduction to the conversation and the historical context as well. Sort of sets the scene for hopefully what a few questions, comments, and responses as well. Thanks, Matt, for that. Tommy, I'm going to come to you now, maybe just for an immediate response to what Matt has said, and maybe for a comment on to what extent you believe that white supremacy is a tool of imperialism. And, the context in the US, it has been clearly defined by Matt as he sees it. Do you think that is applicable here in Ireland today? Do you think white supremacy is a core issue for the division that we're seeing even in the working class or amongst the working class?
Well, for a start, could I thank Matt for what I felt was a brilliant address, really insightful. And there was elements of it that I hadn't been aware of before. So much of it I can identify with, but certainly there's parts of his history was absolutely brilliant. So thanks, Matt, and congratulations for doing that for us. But yes, white supremacy, to my mind, is certainly part of the class division that is used to divide the class, to make sure that the class does not unify, as Matt said, workers of the world unite. So that doesn't happen. It's used to do that. Clearly, in the United States, it was easier to identify people of color, to use white supremacy as such. In Ireland, at the moment, we're seeing something that's possibly has echoes of that, with the migrants coming from, not necessarily from Eastern Europe, because very many times Eastern Europeans look quite the same as us, although they speak a different language, which would echo maybe what happened to the Irish through the famine Irish emigrating to the States, speaking a language that was different from the ruling class. But certainly there's the idea that we have to keep property and high ground away from people coming in from Southern Europe, from Africa, from the Far East, Middle East. And that is classically white supremacy, racist white supremacy. But it has been used in Ireland for centuries. Imperialism has used the notion of race, that while obviously there was no significant difference in the colour of our skin, certainly the idea that the Irish were an inferior race was promoted from way back in the Norman era, the time of the Norman invasion in the 12th century. There was a Welsh Norman propagandist, effectively, who decided to describe the Irish as inferior, talking about them being cannibals, talking about them being people without mercy, a terribly derogatory interpretation of the Irish people, simply not because there was any truth in it, or not even to denigrate them, but to create the conditions by which the Norman conquest could take control, to justify in their minds and in their propaganda the justification for the invasion and occupation of Ireland. Same thing happened time after time, right up to the last major plantation of Ulster, beginning of the 17th century. And we hear it still. And in ways, I could hear echo in what Matt was saying about developing property. How often have we heard of the planters telling us that they come here to Ireland and found a tribal people who needed to have agriculture perfected and benefited from the advanced agricultural techniques being imported from Britain, which was, as Matt says, to justify their seizure of property. Some lessons that are hard to accept, but I think it's all to the good that we've found, Matt so explicit about how the Irish were seconded into the white supremacy in the States. I remember reading one time about shortly after the American Civil War, with I'm reluctant to use the term liberation of the slaves, because I suspect that to this day there's a huge discrepancy between the rights enjoyed by Afro-Americans and the white US citizens. But as we're coming up into what is contemporary, modern day New York, people coming up, Afro-Americans coming up from the South, met with the Irish, the famine Irish, who at the time were destitute, were bottom of the pecking order in part of the northeast United States. And the Irish attacked Afro-Americans, murdered several thousand of them. And at one time, there was supposed to be, the Hudson River was not, I have to be careful, but it was crowded with the dead Afro-Americans. And in ways, the award that the Irish got for not seeing their Afro-American people as their brothers and sisters, as they should have, but that their reward was to get employed in the police forces. I think maybe the fire departments and what the Americans call longshore people, we call dockers. And that type of thing has to be reinforced. I think we've got to hear this more often, that there's no, if you like, just there's no genetic benefit in being Irish or any other nationality, and it's something I've got to be very careful about. And for that reason, because the Irish were seconded into the ruling class through the use of white supremacy and racism in the United States of America, the same thing will happen again and again, and it will happen here if we're not extremely careful, as it's dangerous there at the moment, to protect the capitalist system, to protect the property of capitalism in Ireland, that the ruling class will exploit differences. So I think there's so many lessons to be learned from Matt's brilliant address this evening. Thanks again, Matt, for having delivered a splendid piece of work and educational and informative. So thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Maybe back over to you, Matt, before we speak to our other panelists. But what Tommy has mentioned, brought in, I suppose, the term the ruling class. As we know, the ruling class aren't necessarily white or made up of white people. So sometimes this can be, confusing, perhaps, for people to understand, and that we run the risk that we must also be very clear in our communication, that we would run the risk of even dividing the working class, that Irish people will feel like, well, labelled as racists when they articulate fears about immigrants coming to the country, whenever they express concern about not having enough services and taking our jobs, all of that, that we would just write everybody off as sort of a white supremacist, or, white, using their white privilege maybe, instead of recognising perhaps that this is a tool or a trick. Tommy, don't know if you use our tool of imperialism to divide and to distract the working class. So, like, how do we, just a lot of the time, what was running through my head as you were speaking was like, look at Obama, for example, that you can have a president of, who has visibly black. But how do we then explain to those who are trying to come to terms with what white supremacy means, that he's not a white supremacist because he's black, and that the old trick of a bit like, we need more women in politics. Well, do we? Or, we need more black people in politics. Will that change anything? Or what sort of people are we talking about?
I'd say two things on that. One on on the generations that came from Ireland to the United States. There is a noticeable political difference between the famine generation and the Fenian generation. The Fenian generation, the 1870s and 1880s, these would be the people who would be founders of the Knights of Labor, who would be founders of the American Federation of Labor. They would have a different understanding of race. They also would have come after the end of Reconstruction. So almost to a person, if I look at sort of an Irish American leftist, say William Z. Foster or something like that, uh, their father was a Fenian. Like that's their introduction to politics was their Fenian background, and that's what led them into radicalism here. And perhaps the famine generation are escaping something, not that's a different kind of experience, right? And so they have, and the Fenian generation is, I think, more confident, right, in many ways than the famine generation. So that is a noticeable difference, and almost to a person, if I find an Irish labor activist, they will have a Fenian parent of one sort or another. The on And I agree. The last thing we need to do is start going, "Oh, you're talking your white privilege and stuff like that to poor people because they've never felt a privilege in their life, right?" So that's that, and Obama is, I think, a really like this isn't about race in the way we think it is, right? It's about class, and that's why it is a bit of a mask. For example, most of I just saw recently the majority of ICE agents in this country are immigrants. Wait, what? The majority of ICE agents in this country would speak with a Latin accent, right? And does that mean they're not working for white supremacy? Hardly. It means that white supremacy can bring in the Obamas, can bring in white supremacy is is an ideology that is more expansive than we think. That's one of the problems with it. Because think about in Europe before you had your ideologies of nation or even ethnicity or religion. Race is a much more expansive notion. We can unite all the white people of Europe against the people coming from Latin or from Asia, right? Or something like that. So in a sense, white supremacy is more expansive than other notions, right? And also because white doesn't exist, you could say the Italians aren't white, and then 5 years later, okay, you guys are in. Jews are not white. 10 years later, okay, you guys are in because it's all kind of made up to begin with, right? And so to me, uh, the only way to get around the issue that you're talking about, Rasheen, is in struggle, is in actual activity together. That we're not going to be talking to people. We're not going to be going, oh, you need to get over your racism, or you need to realize we need to get together and sing Kumbaya. That's never going to happen. What needs to happen, we need to organize people in common organizations for common goals. That's the only way this is going to happen, right? So it's not going to all of the South African Truth and Reconciliation and all. That's just a way to hide the truth and to not have a real reconciliation. You have the same thing in Ireland, right? We don't want truth and reconciliation with the ruling class. We're all going to sit down and that's not what we want. Uh, and so I think we want to be combative so that the people who are feeling under threat feel that we are on their side genuinely. And then we need to build real common struggle between people. And they're going to have to learn through it over time. Um, I learned more being in a union with black other members, being in the same common union as a shops than I ever did in all the political meetings of my life, right? Just having to be a shop steward in my union. I was a meat cutter, at a meat factory, and I was one of the few white people working there. To be able to, it was only in the process of organizing a union that I was even conscious of some of this stuff, right? And so I think that's key. If we're not organizing real organizing, we're not doing our job. And no amount of meet and greet and how are we going to get to know each other and let me learn about your culture and I'll learn about mine. That's just BS. That's liberal BS and it's not going to help us.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you, Matt. I mean, we have a lot of like that going on here with, you know, different townlands, different villages, different parts even of Dublin City will say, refugees are welcome here, or, Crumlin for all, or Inchicore for all. But what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
It's just like everybody's welcome, except maybe the person who's been living in
Yeah.
Inchicore
Yeah.
for generations, who's
Right.
feeling really pissed off that they can't afford the rent. So it becomes that liberal notion of anti-racism actually has done an awful lot of harm to our communities and to our working class struggle, I feel. I'm going to go over to Owen. He is in Social Rights Ireland and he's based in Kerry. Matt, he might have a comment or a question for you. You're welcome, Owen. You're muted, Owen. Sorry, you might need to unmute.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Roisin. Yeah, thanks, Matt. It was great to get all that context about American history. Very interesting. I suppose it's just a couple of things about Ireland. We've a, we're maybe a bit more of a unique example because um, I suppose in US, you have the housing projects, and it's the I suppose the product of that whole white supremacist settler plantation um, history you have, and you go to France, and the same thing. It's mostly Algerians, Moroccans from Africa, but in Ireland, you go to, we call the projects the flats or the estates, and it's all native Irish people. And I suppose the class dynamics are a little bit different in that I suppose they're seeing it's kind of feeding into generate gentrification and some of the stuff that's been going on with the whole landlordism, um, property speculation, cowboy capitalism we have here. So there's that element, and you have lots of you have lots of these communities that are stuck kind of with very little access to education um, and not meaningful work to be got. Like, we have a very unbalanced economy, no indigenous industry, and it's very boom and bust, I suppose, because of our, red carpet, tax haven nature. So I suppose they're seeing a lot of more skilled, more educated people coming into the country than them, um, and getting a step up on the ladder in the kind of industries or false industries we have in Ireland. And it kind of creates, and then we have a thing called direct provision here, where basically these mostly like just cowboy property owners and companies they set up make basically how would you define it? They kind of take in refugees. They get 38 euros a week from the government, and they're left in limbo for years. And they have been doing is they've been putting them in the middle of under-resourced working class communities in Dublin and Cork and other towns and big cities, and um, it's causing a lot of trouble. And you have then, I suppose, as Roisin was saying, you have the liberal anti-racists come along then, which kind of dominate the liberal left, and they come out with these slogans as no, we should all be best friends. And of course, it's breeding ground for right-wing agitators to win these communities over, which they have done very easily. So I suppose would you I suppose a question, would you distinguish between xenophobia and white supremacism, or parochialism or and white supremacism? And do you see any analogies like that in the US?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there is a difference. Like everybody's capable of being xenophobic and everybody's capable of being put off by things that are strange, or everybody's capable of that, and that's actually rather normal in some ways. Right? It's unusual, it's different. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a very specific identity with your betters. We're talking about what is fundamentally a collaborationist idea, right? And one of the things is this notion that because I'm white, and this is different than racisms and other stuff, is even though I'm poor, I'm white, so I'm potentially going to be rich one day. And I know that that sounds ridiculous, but people really believe that. They really believe that. And black people, I don't think they don't think I'm black, I'm going to be rich one day because I'm black, right? And I do think white people do think that. And so one of the things that I think that is incumbent on us is what I was saying about ARA, how we used to say, to be loyal to your class, not your race. Because I want to challenge these people who talk about class to be really loyal to their class and break with the identity with the ruling class, right? And right now, uh, uh, and I think this is a product of the last 30 years of the defeat of the Soviet Union, where we don't have class notions. We don't have alternatives. You know, I remember when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened in 1991, a comrade saying to me, "My God, what are the workers going to do with their anger now?" You know? If there's no way to put it into, of course, this is what's going to happen. So the way out for us is bang away on class, bang away on class, bang away on class. Class is, we were talking about white supremacy is inclusive, and that's one of the things that that people like about class is way more inclusive than white supremacy. Like class includes like we can say that now, right? And so one of the things I think is the IWW, when they were trying to organize in the United States, and the AFL refused to organize immigrants, refused to organize women, refused to organize black people. The IWW would go to those neighborhoods and go, "We want women, we want black people, we want immigrants." And I think the left has to say that as well, right? Like we want uh, uh, all of these people we are your movement. But it's a class movement. It's not a liberal movement. And the way that we win angry white people is by being angry ourselves, but at the right people, not the wrong people, because anger is completely justified in this situation. In fact, if you're not angry, you're missing something, right? And white supremacy is to get you to be angry at the wrong people. And we want your anger, but it's got to be directed correctly. And it's the people you identify with, not the people that you dislike, that you don't identify with. Those are the problem.
Finding the common struggle, Matt, as you said previously. Thank you, and thanks, Owen, for giving a bit of background context as well. I don't think Dara Cogley is here today, but he did a good deep dive into the direct provision centres. And guess what? Two Cork men have turned up on the Epstein files who make an awful lot of money out of direct provision. So I'll leave it to Dara. I'll leave everybody else. I'll maybe put the podcast in where Dara did a great expose on the beneficiaries, the Epstein class that is actually, would you believe, extends across the water here to Ireland too, Matt? The compromised and compradors. I'd like to go over to West Cork now, and I see you have your hand up, Simone, for a good wee while there. Thanks for your patience. You might have a comment. Hi, guys, or a question for Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. It's actually John, I think, who wants to make a point. So,
Sure. How are you? Well done, Matt. That was a great talk. I just want to revert to a particular word actually that Tommy used. He used the word seconded, and I like that use of that word. But if you look at like the roots of all racism at the end of the day are based on power and wealth differential throughout history, whereby the ruling class obviously it created its middle class and gave it its privilege and the social structures around that. But as colonialism took hold, obviously the ruling class, recruited sections of the working class. And I like Tommy's word, seconded them. But we look at some place like the United States of America evolved as a colony, whereby throughout history they drove the indigenous people from their land, they stole the land, a process that we know is going on in certain countries today. But they not only stole the land, and white people predominantly, almost exclusively white people took all that land for themselves, European white people. But then they imported slaves from Africa, and we know the process around that to farm that land and to use that land. And I know, Matt, your point about the bodies of these people and everything, which was a great way of putting it. But, slavery, at the end of the day, when I bring that forward to the 2020s that we're in today, and we move us out to when we try and link in Irish people and slavery, and we go out to these countries like the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and that, and we look at all the Irish people who have moved out there. Now, remember, all these Irish people, generally upper middle class or lower middle class or working class people who've got good educations here in Ireland, remember they've moved out and they're expats. If their parents are at home here looking at refugees or African people coming into this country and calling them economic migrants and what have you, but their children are out in the Middle East and they're expats. But not only that, they're doing all the middle class and upper class high paid gigs and jobs tax free out there, and able to save up money to come home and buy houses and everything like that. Now, some of them might be running out of it pretty quickly the way things are shaping up. But out in those countries as well, we have this whole layer of modern slavery where Bangladeshis, Bengalis, Pakistanis do all the literally slave labor to prop up those entities out there. And Irish people now have been seconded, to use Tommy's word, into that whole scenario where we are exploiting that situation, taking the money from those people and bringing that back home. So we've evolved now into the worst forms, if you like, of colonialization and using slaves in our own way. That's my point, really.
A very, very valid point. Thank you, John. I'm so glad you brought it up. So glad that that it has arisen. Matt, you might want to respond to that, or are you aware of the situation?
No, I think that's
it's
an excellent point. An excellent point. And this is the capitalism is international, and we are part of an international system. I think it's very important to recognize one of the things about immigration, that when we're talking about immigration, this is capitalism. Immigration is, I mean, it's part of what labor is a commodity. There's a market for it. Labor moves. Saying you're against immigration, you might as well say I'm against unemployment. I mean, you have to be against the entire capitalist system, right? Everybody who's ever taken a bus to work is an economic migrant in a certain sense, right? Like the jobs aren't in our front door. We must go to the job, right? My family who came to the United States, I have very interesting. One side of my family was here as sort of settler, colonial people, very long time, owned land, they were farmers. And then my mom's side of the family doesn't arrive until the last 80 years or so, and they're literally recruited to go right into a coal mine, right? From somewhere in Europe. Like the idea of them coming here to own property is not going to happen. They're literally coming here just to work in a coal mine. And on my father's side, where the people did own property, they think of themselves very much as white. On my mother's side, who were all coal miners and recent immigrants, I don't think that would be the first thing they thought about at all. Maybe not even in the top 20 that they would have thought about. So, even in my own family, I see these class differentiations in how people view whiteness and what is an immigrant and what is not. And any country that ever had an empire, you don't get to complain about immigration. I'm sorry. That's the rules. The United States just invaded Venezuela. They don't get to complain about immigration. You don't want immigrants, don't invade it. The United States is about to invade Cuba. It's 90 miles away. There will be 100,000 Cubans here tomorrow morning. If you don't want immigration, don't invade Cuba. If you don't want immigration, don't invade Syria. If you're going to invade Syria, you get the immigrants.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Well said. And just a reminder, particularly in this moment in time where, it's all about displacement, dispossession again, creating these never-ending wars that are going to create never-ending immigration and asylum, seeking asylum. Stephen, would you like to come in? Stephen is in Social Rights Ireland, and he is often actually the host of many of our programs. So, Stephen, have you a question or a comment for Matt?
Hi, thanks, Roisin. Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. Very, very interesting, all of this. I have a kind of a question wrapped up in a comment or vice versa. Maybe you could speak a little bit to what I would see as the ambivalence, if not cognitive dissonance, that a lot of Irish people experience in relation to American imperialism. And I'm thinking in terms of the Irish in Ireland, but maybe you can also talk to that similar phenomenon among Irish Americans, where you've got, politicians like Steve King a generation ago, Brendan Boyle, who like to pose with Jerry Adams and present themselves as Irish Republicans, and yet at the same time they're front row cheerleaders for brutal American imperialism. And here in Ireland, it's really struck me in the last 2.5 years with the genocide in Gaza and now this World War III that while most Irish people, don't have too much difficulty denouncing the cruelty and the brutality of the Israelis, there's a kind of a reticence when it comes to America because there's still it's uncomfortable, my parents' generation grew up with Bing Crosby and Mickey Rooney, and there was a sense that, they're kind of in our corner, the Yanks. And even today, there's this hangover, and we've got, as we speak, our dear, glorious leader, Mr. Micheál Martin, is over pumping hands in Washington, D.C., looking for deals and basically looking for favors and favorable treatment. He's kind of doing on a national level what, the Irish are doing over in Dubai that John referenced. So if you could just talk a little bit about that kind of, yeah, that I don't know what you'd call it exactly. Yeah, cognitive dissonance is the word that comes to mind for me. Um, I was reminded when thinking about this earlier of the speeches of Hassan Nasrallah before he was assassinated, where he made a very, very, he made a point of saying this is not a war against Israel primarily. Israel is not primarily our enemy. Our enemy is the United States empire. And he focused attention back onto that this is a classic anti-imperial struggle. And here in Ireland, we're very torn on that because our natural sympathies are to Palestine and Cuba, and seeing the treatment meted out to them so similar to what we endured under the British. And yet we have this cozy relationship, now also an economic dependency on the United States. Thanks.
I think there's a historic reason for that. There's a strong historic reason, and that is the American ruling class used Ireland in their conflict with the British Empire, especially after World War I. The main imperial rival of the United States was, believe it or not, Britain, and especially in Latin America. And so, and with huge amounts of, and that's exactly the period of the Irish Revolution. So you have Woodrow Wilson in with his points of, whatever, 21 points or whatever it is. I remember the exact numbers, the Bolsheviks, and I always get confused. Are we talking about Wilson's or Lenin's 21 points? But so right 1919, 1920, 1921 is exactly the time when the United States is most confrontational with the British Empire, especially in Latin America. And so they didn't mind in that period saying, yeah, the British Empire, they come into Latin America, and Latin America really should be ours because it's the Western Hemisphere. And Irish people, wouldn't you love to help get the Brits out of the Western Hemisphere? Like, we won't worry about Ireland now. We're talking about the Western Hemisphere, right? And so that's really what happened. Particularly the Democratic Party, which is Wilson's party, made that pitch to Irish America around the struggle that the Republic was waging against Britain to support American imperialism in Latin America. So yeah, and they can only do that because of white supremacy. They could only do that because they would allow Irish people to view themselves, identify with the American ruling class, right? That's the only way that was able to happen. And so, yeah, I think the answer is real history and white supremacy, which is a psychology almost more than anything, And again, it is identifying with your betters, with your master. It's, when the master says, I have there's an old joke and, where the slave says to the master, are we sick, master? If the master's sick, I'm sick too. What a ridiculous notion, right? Are we sick, master? But I think that is at the core of it. And in part, it's because people don't have enough of a class identity, right? So you don't have a class identity to stand on, so you can create a racial identity real quick. It's also a racial identity is very easy and very comforting. It's there are other identities that are harder. Class is a hard identity because it means struggle. It means, but race it's simple. All I've got to do is be it. It's the easiest thing in the world. Mm-hmm. And for white folks, when you feel the entitlement to it, it's even easier, because it's entitlement as well, right? It's not, you don't have to struggle. Just, and we have this, we have in America, we call it the Karen syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard, where the white lady gets on the phone and is always complaining about everybody, right? And that's white supremacy. That's, like, wait, there's some people, I'm going to get on the phone and call people, and again, to your betters, white supremacy is, in a sense, one large snitch on your coworker, right? That's in part what it is. It's collaborationist. And when you've been denied access, as Irish people were in Ireland, and then given access, it is a very strong person who's going to say no to that, right? You'd have to be very politically strong to say no to that. And some of those Fenians did say no to it, but most did not.
Matt, the more this conversation goes on, and it's actually through the engagement of others that it becomes clearer, actually the message becomes clearer. It's so important. The presentation is so important too, but the engagement, Stephen, the question you asked and the way that you've responded, Matt, has been created, deeper clarity. So important, Matt. And I don't want to end the programme, or certainly don't want to end this recording without going over to Comrade Barry Murray of the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum, because we are often in touch with each other, Barry and myself, and I'm often telling him, you can't contact me now, Barry, I'm a wage slave, don't you know? So just when we were talking about slavery as well, it's really, I find this particularly frustrating as a teacher, that how we are preparing young people for the world of work is actually, how we are getting them ready for becoming slaves. And, you know, when we talk about, I teach history as well, we talk about slavery, you think it was just done and dusted. And we talk about abolitionists and, you know, important people who ended slavery. And oh, thank goodness it's all over. So Barry, on that point, do you agree I'm a wage slave? Are you an equal wage slave? Just on slavery, perhaps for those who believe, sadly, probably not here in this room right now, but those who still believe in, you know, that they are free and that they are equal as well, which is this illusion, like the illusion of democracy as well, you know, how it continues to manifest itself and divide the working class.
Thanks, Matt, for your contributions and answers. They provide great clarity. The thing of it is that, you know, power understands class better than we do. And the other thing is too that they use the anticipation by the working class of getting richer and better as actually a weapon against the working class and against the unification of the working class and workers. They know that that type of psyche is there and they play upon it. And then, of course, in the north here, they introduced sectarianism and they've introduced racism throughout Ireland. And we see racism now in Ireland more so than we've ever seen it. It was always there to a greater or lesser extent, but, you know, it was against travellers first. And now, because there's people with different colours of skin appearing in Ireland, because of the atrocities of imperialism and capitalism right throughout the world, which is ignored, of course, then now there's an opportunity to divide the class even more. Wage slaves are wage slaves, and they're an essential. We're the majority. Remember, the wage slaves are the majority. The ruling class is the minority. People forget that. You know that the ruling class are the minority in every country. We are the majority, but we seem to have lost the ability to come together and use the very real power that we have, and that's a pity. Now that's born of many things. It's born of colonialism. It's born of our education. It's born of the media, the power of the media, and indeed religions have had a major effect on all of this as well. People's thinking, and as activists, we have to consider all that. As activists, we need to understand in detail, and we need to rehearse the stuff any way we can, and we need to be involved in activities and actions that help other people as well as ourselves to begin to understand that one, we are the majority, we have the power, and two, that the ruling class is using all of these things against us, and that they're weapons of the ruling class and the property class. And of course, that's the other part of it. If the ownership of property was gone in the morning, that would change an awful lot. Because, I mean, I will work twice as hard as you, rushing to get more money than you to pay the bigger mortgage that I have on my house. And I don't care if you lose your job as long as I get my job. And that's what the ownership of property does to people's minds. So basically, on the ground, I mean, I would advocate that people begin to understand one thing, that they have the power. We are the majority, and that the people out there who are activists, and even people who are not activists, need to understand that as working class people within any country, and within Ireland in particular, we have the power. We're the majority. All we have to do is to begin to understand that we need to exercise that power in whatever way we can. One of the better ways is to become educated and begin to understand how a country actually works and how capitalism works. That's an important thing. And then to begin to put together people's community councils in different areas and put the pressure on the system and expose the system. I mean, that's what it's about. And we have to get elected too out there. Workers have to get elected to parliaments, not to build the parliaments, not to support the parliaments, not to propagate them in any way, but to destroy them and to destroy capitalism as well.
Barry. Thank you very much. Matt, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to end the recording now, but if you'd like to stay on, if you are able to stay on, Matt, it would be great. And if anybody else would like to stay on for maybe 10 minutes for a quick Q&A, that's fine with us. So thank you very much, Matt Siegfried, this week's special guest for talking about white supremacy in the United States then and now. And I think this hopefully is a conversation to be continued. Matt, we would love to have you back. We don't want to exploit you too much, but it would be wonderful to return to this conversation and to continue it maybe in a few weeks' time. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next Monday night. Thank you to Tommy, to Barry, Patricia, thank you for making this possible behind the scenes. Thank you, Owen and Stephen, for your contributions as well. And Matt, we'll see you soon.
Very good. Thanks.